At exactly 5:34 p.m. on March 9, 1945, the sirens began to wail across Tokyo, but what was coming wasn't what anyone expected. This wasn't a standard high-altitude daylight raid. This was something else entirely, something that had never been tested in the history of human conflict. The man behind it was Major General Curtis LeMay. He was 38 years old, a bulldog-faced engineer from Ohio, who had been sent to the Pacific to fix a broken bombing campaign. For months, the mighty B-29 Superfortress had been flying missions against Japan from bases in the Marianas. The results were abysmal. The jets stream over. Japan was a raging river of air, scattering bombs wildly and making precision bombing a fantasy. LeMay stared at the failure reports. He stared at reconnaissance photos. And then he looked at something else, which was the streets of Tokyo. The city wasn't built of stone and steel. It was a vast ocean of tightly packed wood and paper, a tinderbox holding 5 million souls. He had a terrifying idea, a plan that his own commanders would later admit he kept secret from Washington because he was certain they would forbid it. His order was radical. Strip the B-29s. Remove almost all their defensive machine guns and gunners to lighten the load. Then fly the planes not at 30,000 feet, but at a terrifyingly low altitude between 5,000 and 9,000 feet in complete darkness. And instead of high explosive bombs, load them with clusters of incendiaries, which were M69 napalm bomblets designed to stick to rooftops and spread liquid fire. The attack would be at night, a low-altitude stream of individual bombers, not a tight defensive formation. It was on paper. Crews calculated the odds of surviving 70 missions and found the math did not favor them. Across the Pacific Ocean, the defense of Japan's capital rested on the shoulders of General Shizuichi Tanaka. He was the commander of the Eastern District Army, a disciplined and thoughtful officer. Tanaka had prepared rigorously for the expected American assault. His intelligence pointed to high-altitude daylight raids aimed at military factories. He had positioned his anti-aircraft guns, his barrage balloons, and his fighter squadrons to intercept precisely that kind of threat. His civil defense plans, honed by the frequent tremors of the earth, were built around the expectation of a great earthquake, which was a disaster that would strike with warning tremors and leave isolated pockets of destruction that fire brigades could contain. The concept of a vast, nocturnal, low-level saturation fire attack did not exist in his defensive manuals. It was an operational impossibility that no one had calculated for. On the afternoon of March 9, on the island of Guam, crewmen watched in stunned silence as mechanics used forklifts to remove the heavy turrets from the bellies and tops of their silver planes. Fear was a physical presence. LeMay's own staff estimated they might lose 70 aircraft along with 770 men. But just before the first bomber, piloted by Colonel Robert Morgan, began its takeoff roll, a weather report came in. The skies over Tokyo were predicted to be clear with a steady wind. At 5:36 p.m., Japanese civil defense observers on the Boso Peninsula spotted 2 fast-moving dots. They were the Pathfinder planes, and they were flying very low. The report went to General Tanaka's headquarters. The assumption was a reconnaissance mission or a small provocateur raid. Standard fighters were scrambled, but they were prepared for the wrong fight. Then, at exactly 12:07 a.m. on March 10th, the first marker bombs fell. They did not explode in a thunderous blast. They burst with a soft, brilliant luminescence, dripping lines of fire in a giant flaming X that precisely mapped the densely populated Shitamachi ward. The word bombing was about to be redefined. At 12:15 a.m., the main armada arrived. They came not as a single roaring formation, but as a long, low droning serpent of individual bombers, stretching back 400 miles. Hundreds of B-29s, now ghostly silhouettes against a moonlit sky, began to drop their payloads. The first sticks of M69s crashed through flimsy roofs and erupted, splashing gelatinized gasoline onto wooden walls. It started as a series of distinct blazes, but within 30 minutes, a meteorological monster was born. The individual fires, consuming millions of square feet of oxygen, began to breathe. They sucked in the surrounding atmosphere, creating a sustained wind that reached in a hurricane force on the ground. This was not a fire. This was a firestorm. The temperature in the center of the inferno soared to 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Asphalt roads began to bubble and liquefy, trapping pedestrians. The superheated air rushed upwards with such force that the massive B-29s flying thousands of feet above were caught in violent thermal updrafts. Planes weighing 65 tons were flipped upside down and tossed 1,000 feet skyward like dead leaves. Crews smelled the acrid scent of burning wood and a deeper, more primal odor inside their cockpits. Many were violently sick, not from fear, but from the sheer physical turbulence and the horror unfolding in the glowing panorama below them. On the ground, General Tanaka's defense system had collapsed into absolute chaos. The fire brigades were valiant but futile. Their water hoses evaporated before the stream could reach the flames. The massive network of concrete, earthquake shelter basins, painstakingly built to protect against tremors, became crematoriums. As the firestorm ripped the oxygen from the air, the canals boiled. People seeking refuge on iron bridges found the metal so scalding that it seared. Flesh on contact. The orderly evacuation protocols, rehearsed for months, were reduced to a primal, desperate scramble. The official records of the Eastern District Army would later describe the event not as a military engagement but as a tidal wave of heat. For 3 unrelenting hours, the stream of bombers continued. Pilots like Lieutenant Richard Gross had to navigate not by radar, but by the terrifying pulsating orange glow that was visible for 150 miles. Planes returned to Guam with their silver, aluminum skin blackened and warped by the heat, and their fuselages saturated with an oily soot that had been human, life, wood, and fabric just an hour before. A total of 279 B-29s dropped 1,665 tons of incendiaries. In the span of 180 minutes, they destroyed 16 square miles of Tokyo. The area of urban devastation exceeded the atomic bombing of Nagasaki, which was still 5 months in the future. When the sun rose on March 10th, it revealed a ghostly, flattened wasteland of white ash and twisted steel. The human brain could not process the scale of the loss. Official Japanese police estimates recorded 267,171 buildings destroyed. Over 1 million people were made homeless overnight. The precise death toll has never been and will never be fully known. The official history of the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey placed the immediate casualties at nearly 84,000 souls lost, with over 40,000 injured, which was a toll that surpassed the immediate death count of the atomic bomb dropped on Nagasaki. Curtis LeMay lost 14 aircraft, not the 70 that the Pentagon feared. The gamble had paid off with military precision. He would go on to replicate this model of destruction across Nagoya, Osaka, and Kobe, systematically burning Japan's industrial heart. The March raid on Tokyo was the first domino in a strategic shift that ended the era of precision targeting and began the age of total urban deconstruction. Yet, in the smoldering silence after the inferno, a quiet irony lingered. General Tanaka, the man tasked with protecting the city, survived the war only to face the impossible question of how do you defend a wooden sea against a rain of fire. The Tokyo raid proved that the engineering of destruction had finally outpaced the ancient human instinct for survival. The wall of flame that passed through the Shitamachi district didn't just change the course of the war. It held up a dark mirror to the 20th century, revealing a future where cities themselves could become weapons, and the very air could be turned into an instrument of absolute finality. The ash that fell on Tokyo fell too on the conscience of the modern world.